Another video about coding? Yes, other videos will come soon, but it takes time. As you might know, I'm on this quest about learning how to code, and it's been challenging, least to say. I first created this web app I call Talentforms, which helps you recruit without cover letters or resumes. I then thought it would be a good idea to go through freeCodeCamp to learn more about the fundamentals, which it was. But it took me roughly 2 months to go through the first 2 modules in freeCodeCamp, which was a lot longer than I initially thought it would take to go through the whole curriculum of freeCodeCamp. So instead of finishing freeCodeCamp, I decided to create another web app which became Café Surfers. And Café Surfers is a site where you can find and share awesome cafes to work and study from. Café Surfer is pretty simple. It got a map, you can search and add cafes, and you can upvote. I coded between 2 to 6 hours every day, and it took me less than a month to finish Café Surfers. How did I come up with the idea for Café Surfers? During the last 3 years I spent some time working from different cafes. Some have been good and some of them have been bad. So I thought, why not make a site where you can find all the good ones? And the name Café Surfer comes from café surfing, which is just the thing I used to say when I'm out working from different cafes. So I'm out café surfing. What coding languages did I use to build Café Surfers with? Well, I used HTML, CSS, and tried to use only JavaScript. And when I say tried, I say it because in some use cases JavaScript is really hard to use to build out some functions. So instead of using JavaScript, I used jQuery because it's like one line of jQuery translates into several lines of JavaScript code. But even if it was like that, I tried to use JavaScript wherever I could, but sometimes it was too hard, so I had to use jQuery. I also used some APIs to build this web app. APIs from places like Mapbox, Twitter, Facebook, and Google. Mapbox I used for the map, and Twitter, Facebook, and Google for the login. APIs make coding a bit easier and faster, so instead of coding everything from scratch, you can use pre-built things like the map from Mapbox. I tried to code everything myself, but if I would have been coding the map like the one I use from Mapbox, I probably wouldn't be done in the next couple of years. I noticed that planning a web app before you start coding it is really important, but also really hard. Or at least I found it hard to plan a web app before I start coding it. But why is it that important to plan it out before you start coding it? I think it is because you want to have the basic function of the web app that you want to create before you start creating it. Because then you have like the boundaries of what you want to build, like the very first version of your web app. Because if you start to code it and you go out from your first idea, you will find other things that will be nice to have things, like small functions here and there, and they're all like infinite possibilities to do with web apps. So that's why I think it's so important to build or to plan out the basic functionality of your web app before you start building it, because then when you have created those functions, then you're done with your MVP or version 0.1. When you finish the basic functions of your web app, you can launch it to a small group of users and start testing it out and see if your basic functions was the functions that was needed, if you need to add other ones. But when you're doing that, you know that the functions you will create will most likely be used by the users, instead of like putting from the beginning a whole bunch of functions that might not be even used or make the user experience worse or something like that. And then you have just spent a whole bunch of time into nothing. So it's about saving time for yourself. I know there are lots of tools out there that can help you visualize and plan your web app before you start coding it. But what I found useful is actually to open up a document and just make bullet points with the parts and functions that your version 0.1 web app will need to function as you want it. Like, what are the fewest, most important functions and parts to make my web app work as I want it in the beginning? And the second thing is to draw the whole web app on paper or a whiteboard, how you think you want a web app to look like. Like, really make a rough sketch of your web app with the different pages and the different buttons and things like that. Not super detailed, but just so you can get a picture of it, like visualize it how you want it to look like. So my conclusion, learn by coding. I always believed in the classic saying, learn by doing, and yet another time that showed to be true, for me. I noticed after coding Talentforms and going through the 2 first modules in freeCodeCamp that the best way for me to learn coding is actually to code projects from scratch. Learn by coding. Café Surfers is now online. I've done some testing, but I really don't know what to test it for and how to test it, and I really don't want to test it, so I just put it up online and see how it works. But I've done some limitations for Café Surfers, and by limitations I mean you can only search and find cafes in Sweden. And why I've done that is just because it feels like it's an easier way to start out. Instead of having the whole world's cafes, I only have Sweden's cafes, which is a whole bunch already to start with. And also because most of you who are watching my videos are from Sweden. But we'll see. I probably take off the limitations if it works well. I just have to go change the things that didn't work so well so it will work well. So that's the test. Hope you liked this video. If you got any questions, just ask them in a comment down below. You know how it works. And if you want to check out Café Surfers, go do that. CafeSurfers.com. Have a nice day. Take care. Bye.